Welcome, everyone, to the newest episode of the BiblioSophia channel. I'm your host, Samuel David, and today I am joined by educator, ritualist, poet, researcher, writer, and photographer, Harper Feist. Harper, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me on board. And thanks to Anathema Press for having me on board BiblioSophia. And you listed all my titles and everything, but you forgot troublemaker. How come?
Troublemaker. Well, I have to keep it family friendly for our listeners and our
Oh,
viewers.
you didn't tell me we had to behave ourselves.
It's all relative speaking, I guess.
Thank heavens. Let me know if I transgress, will you?
It's pretty wild the shoes on the other foot here. The last
Mm.
time we interacted, you were interviewing me. Now it's my turn to interview you, ask all of the leading questions, the riddles that I've always wanted to throw at you. So let's go. Tell us a little bit about yourself for our viewers and our listeners who are not familiar with your work.
Wow. Well, let's see. I have been doing the esoteric thing my whole adult life, and because I'm not a spring chicken, that it's been by now a long time, and I have done a lot of different things, as the list of titles would suggest. But I think one of the things that's going to come out in our conversation, Sam, is that my practice has evolved through a variety of different deities and approaches. And I think it's worth actually talking about that, um, maybe by way of giving people permission to evolve, grow, change, and become different people and different practitioners.
As I
Mm.
understand, you started out under Starhawk through her reclaiming tradition. Is that correct?
Well, that's not the starting point, but that was certainly my entree into community ritual and community practice, path working, that sort of thing. Prior to my appearance in reclaiming community, I had been solitary for some time. Um, I want to say that the first deity that I had sort of devoted myself to was Bridget,
Mhm.
and I was a solitary Bridget practitioner for many years before I encountered the reclaiming community after I moved to Massachusetts, um, following my grad school experience in Denver.
It's interesting that you mentioned Bridget because not only is she a goddess of light, as I understand it, she is also a smithing deity. So I think that kind of goes into that goes along with your work as a scientist, if I'm not mistaken.
I suppose, I mean, there's poetic overlap, if nothing else, and certainly the temporal overlap is not so good. When I was working with Bridget Bree kind of a long time ago, and it's funny that you bring up the smith crafting aspect of her. One of my very first devotional acts to Bree was to take a very large diameter copper pipe, to split it by hand and to pound it into a crown that some of my sisters and I in the reclaiming community a little later used used in ritual. And that actually it started out innocently enough, but then the the goddess took me, and by the time I was finished with that, I probably had a good couple of weeks of continuous hands-on structuring of that crown. It was really a lot of work.
That's incredible. Do you still have the crown, or has it become an heirloom of your
Mm.
former tradition?
No, I'm not sure where it is anymore. I was thinking about this just recently, in fact, and I will probably go back to my Massachusetts sisters and see if anybody still has it. It was a beautiful thing.
Well, I hope you're able to find it because I
Mm,
definitely would love to see it, and I'm sure all of your friends on social media and in person would like to see it
mm.
too. Those who haven't seen it.
Well, if it shows back up, I will gladly share, of course.
I look forward to it. And who knows, maybe when we see each other again, you'll wear it in person.
Well, if it's possible, certainly. You know, the goddess that grabbed me immediately after Brie, though, was the goddess that you and I have in common, Inanna. The group of people that I practiced with, the reclaiming community in Massachusetts, we did a lot of work with Inanna, Ereshkigal, the whole sort of pantheon surrounding that. Um, we we did almost exclusively large public ritual around Inanna and Ereshkigal as agents of personal transformation. So we would there were three of us, and one of my sisters in arms, as it were, was an employee of the local Unitarian church. So we used Unitarian churches to host our our four yearly large rituals, and great many of them were kind of following Inanna around as she descended into the underworld or um, played lettuce games with Dumuzi.
Which maybe we'll touch on later in the chat today. So, as I understand it, uh, Starhawk was pretty instrumental in bringing the myth of Inanna, the myth cycle, the image of Inanna into the consciousness of not just the reclaiming tradition, but also the Wiccan tradition. Is that correct? Am I mistaken?
You know, I'm not so sure. So what I do know about Starhawk is that she, well, kind of late 70s, I would say, wrote a book called The Spiral Dance, where she kind of incorporated a lot of different pantheons, a lot of different goddesses in into her or into her focus, into reclaiming's focus of magical activism and how to get people spiritually to stand in the way of things harming the environment and things harming people's rights. So what they stand for nowadays is environmental, like the activism having to do with environment, but also living wage, uh, sexual and gender related fairness, that sort of thing. And they're really quite interested in making the world a better place for people, animals, that sort of thing.
So the definite intersection between the social, the spiritual, and the
Mm,
self.
hmm And that drew me for a long time when I lived in Massachusetts. Um, when I moved away from Massachusetts, I kind of lost track of that community when I moved back to Denver at some point after having done lots of this ritual, and there was a reclaiming community there, but it was not as cozy to me as the one in Massachusetts was, and I got interested in other things, um, and which kind of led me straight to the OTO. And Denver was where I got involved with the OTO.
Interesting. How
Mm.
long were you with the OTO chapter in your area?
Well, so I had been looking for the OTO since I think since I got my first tarot deck, like so when I was 18 or something like that. It was a Thoth deck, and of course it had the card in the back about how to get a hold of the OTO. And I tried hard, but back in those days, no email, no social media, none of the ready access that we have today. And my phone calls and letters fell on deaf ears, and I never hooked up with any of the OTO folks until I stumbled upon them in Denver and saw my first Gnostic Mass, and I was pretty taken with that ritual, still pretty taken with that ritual. And that was what caused me to get involved with the OTO.
And how long
And
were you with them?
I was with the Denver. so the Denver Lodge, like, is it an oasis? It's a smaller body. It's called Crux Ansata. Um, I was with them until I moved, and I've moved all over the place. So I moved to Florida where there was nobody close. So when I was in Florida, I went to Mass in Atlanta. I went to Mass in New Orleans, Daytona, the Jacksonville, I guess, all sorts of different places. And now, well, I guess most recently I lived in Minnesota, and I actually was the lodge master of Leaping Laughter when I lived there. Now I live in Rochester, New York, and there's no OTO body here. There's one in Buffalo, and I'm just kind of getting acquainted with those fine folks.
That's exciting. It's definitely good to have people that you're aligned with spiritually and socially in
Mm,
your neck of the woods. I know that's definitely a challenge, at least here in the Midwest, where the number of practitioners is relatively small. I know that I'm pretty fortunate to have, people like Semi or people like Jack Grail who
mm.
are within spitting distance, and then you know and then everyone else in the surrounding area in like Indiana or
Mhm.
Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota. So we're definitely at a crossroads here. So
Mm.
as I understand it, when you were with the OTO, you were quite the rabble rouser, quite the provocateur.
Me?
Yeah,
Well,
you.
just to be clear, I'm still with the OTO. I'm not super active these days because of a lack of a local body, but I'm active on the Grand Lodge level. The I'm one of two people called the ombuds person. So I help interface between folks who are kind of having trouble and upper management, if you will. I'm an ordained priestess. I love to celebrate the Gnostic Mass, and I do that whenever I can with whomever is around. Um, and of course, I suppose everybody knows that I am the lead interviewer on the Grand Lodge podcast, which is called Thelema NOW. And I talked with you not very long ago about your recent book on Thelema NOW. It was a real pleasure, of course.
Absolutely. It certainly was a real pleasure. So, Harper, we have some ritual experience together. One of the more memorable ones
Mhm.
that I've ever experienced in my life, and let's talk about it, shall we?
Oh, I think we should. What would you like to set the stage? You know it as
Well,
well as I do.
I do know it as well as you do. It was a beautiful sunny day, and you were leading an OTO ritual. I was there. Jack Grail was there. Zemiami Jehudi was there, and you, of course, were leading us in a ceremonial rite dedicated to Set and Horus to commemorate the spring equinox. And there certainly was quite a lot of frisson in the air that
Mm.
culminated in a rather startling epiphany in the form of gunshots, no less.
Well, it was a first for me. To be absolutely clear, that's not a formal OTO ritual. It was put together by a member of Leaping Laughter at some point a while ago. But you're absolutely right. We got together. It was maybe April of last year. I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember. So a while ago. And the four of us were in an Airbnb that kind of overlooks the train tracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Springfield.
Lots of
And
rooftops too.
yeah, lots of and that plays into the story. So we donned our finery, we got Sud and Horace together, we completed the ritual, and we were just kind of taking that deep breath upon finishing it when some very some very disturbing sounds happened outside the sliding glass door of the Airbnb, which I think was seventh or eighth floor.
It was
It was
pretty
up
high up.
it was up pretty high. And so I looked out the sliding glass door, and I saw what seemed to be a muzzle flash. And we heard what were undoubtedly gunshots. I hastily advised all of my friends to drop to the ground. Um, I think I screamed, get down," and we all laid on the floor for a little while.
Yeah, for a little while, it seemed like an eternity, punctuated by nervous laughter on my part.
Right, I think there were some oh fucks at Jesus or two, and we waited until we no longer heard any gunshots, and then we very cautiously got up and looked out the window, and strangely, we sat there and we waited for the sounds of EMTs and firemen and policemen, whatever. No sirens ever came. There were no more gunshots. And the we looked nervously at the Sutton Horace statues that were sitting together on on the altar. It was astonishing.
We just had to bring them together, and of course, that
Mm.
led to this momentous event. Something that I'm not used to, because usually any ritual or ceremonial work that I've done that has resulted in an epiphany has usually been either in the form of an animal sound or a meteorological
Mm.
phenomenon,
Uh-huh.
or, well, definitely not the sound of gunfire in the distance. So that was quite an eventful ritual that we participated in together that you led. I'm curious as to what other group rituals you've led that you'd be willing to share with our listeners and our viewers.
No gunshots were involved in this one, but when we were setting up to do this interview, you asked me if I had ever written any rituals about Inanna.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So, of course, I have done a ton of Inanna ritual. Um, I've done Inanna ritual for adults using the descent mythology to kind of look at the sort of things that prohibit us from seeing our deep, our true selves.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine that the descent mythology can be used to do that through the removal of your signs of ritual authority, the may, the law. What are you when all of those things have been removed? That turns out to be a really useful mythic arc for adults. Now, we also wrote some really beautiful rituals for children that involved another part of the descent story, and that is that recall that Inanna had a friend, her Sukal, Ninshibur,
Mm-hmm.
I think was the name of the Sukal. And the Sukal was basically her guide, her best friend. And before Inanna goes to see Ereshkigal, in at least the Kramer version of the story, Inanna says to Ninshibur, "Okay, if I get into trouble, go to my dad, get some help, and save my ass." Right? Not so many words, of course, but Ninshibur is watching to make sure that Inanna doesn't get in trouble. And so when Inanna actually does get in trouble and winds up hung on the wall like Han Solo in Carbonite, and
It's a good way
Ninshibur,
to put it.
this is how I imagine it nowadays. So Ninshibur goes to Enki and says, "Excuse me, that daughter of yours could use a hand." And Enki says, "Well, um, I don't really want to do it myself, so I'm going to send my agents." And so he picks some dirt out from his fingernails and he invents these little creatures, um, the Kurgawa and the
Mm-hmm.
Galatur, and releases them. And these little beings, they go and they talk to Ereshkigal. And when Ereshkigal doesn't feel well, She moans, it turns out, and she moans in ritual just in the same way that she moans in the myth. And the little fingernail dirt beasties, they mirror her agony back to her, and she feels so understood and so heard, at least this is how it goes in our ritual, that she releases Han Solo from carbonite and Inanna from the wall. And we use Ninshubur and the little fingernail dirt beasties as ways to show children that they're not alone, and that various people, their parents, their friends, and the gods have their backs. And I want to say that among those rituals for children were amongst the best that I've ever concocted. Now, wind forward a whole bunch of years, and I found myself writing the the end ritual for the 2016 OTO Women's Symposium that happened in Minneapolis, where we wanted to have a Eucharistic ritual that was female power heavy. Not that the Mass isn't, but anyway, the priestess actually generates most of the juju in the Gnostic Mass proper. But we wanted to have a ritual where the priestess was the kind of dominant practitioner in the rite. So I wrote a Eucharistic ritual surrounding Babylon and chaos as they appear in Crowley's vision and the voice. So this kind of the root of the whole thing is the Gnostic Creed, where the principal god and goddess are chaos and Babylon, not Nuit and Hadit, surprisingly. We could get into the whole theology around that, but for the moment, chaos and Babylon were the principal gods in this ritual I wrote. And as per Crowley, who likes to pull in Greek words and Greek phrases in the Gnostic Mass, instead of using Greek and the Greek Egyptian mythology that's so prevalent in Thelema, I use the Sumerian myth of Inanna and Dumuzi. And gradually throughout the course of the ritual, the practitioners and the deities called become less and less chaos in Babylon and more Inanna and Dumuzi. And at the end, and the reason for that, of course, is that the Inanna and Dumuzi story is delicious and full of sensuality and sexual power that is very female dominant in most cases. And so if you would let me do it, I'd like to read some pieces from that ritual to show you how it worked.
Oh, please
Would
do.
that be okay? All
That would
right.
be wonderful.
So in the ritual, the priestess appears as Babylon, and as Babylon is taken out of her mummy wrapping, basically, that's how we sneak her into the ritual, is covered with mummy cloth. So as her attendants remove all of the cloth from her, and the deaconess gives her the blood of the saints, she pulls out her sword and she says, "There is nothing I have not trampled beneath my feet. There is nothing that I have not set a garland on my brow. I have wound all things about my waist as a girdle. I have hidden all things in the cave of my heart. I have slain all things because I am innocent. I have lain with all things because I am untouched virginity. I have given birth to all things because I am death. Stainless are my lips, for they are redder than the purple of the vine, and the blood wherewith I am intoxicated." And then several minutes later in the ritual, we pull in the Inanna and Dumuzi story, and Chaos speaks to Babylon from behind a veil, and he says to her, and you'll recognize some words straight from Volkstein and Kramer. Chaos says to Babylon, "I sing your name, Babylon, O Babylon, as I walk, as I walk, as I pass along the banks of the August River, as I roam along the banks of the Euphrates, as I pass along the gaudy streets. Oh, my beautiful one, may you be as a seed planted in the dark and fertile soil. And here's some treats from the Gnostic Mass. May you be the fruit. May you be the stem. May you be the bud, the leaf, the flower, a beautiful ripened fruit. May you be the one who beautifies. May you be the nursing mother of the womb. May you be your own mother's womb and all wombs, the root of all, a fertile vine. Oh, my beloved. Then, a little bit later, the attendants put the two together and they stand hand in hand, cheek to cheek. And Chaos says to Babylon, as I said unto the Queen of Heaven, Babylon, I would go with you to our garden. Yea, I would go with you to our orchard. I would go with you even unto our apple tree. There would I plant the sweet honey-covered seed. There I would enter into thy garden, into thy beautiful temple. There with you I would weave the veil of life upon the face of the Spirit. And then the two say together, Suni Sugata Dega Dhammamani, Sabani Saabguta Dega Dhammamane, Sugsagse Ma'alana Ukubi Zeba Anga, Sab Taba Tabana Hiliki Kukuda Anga, which is the transliterated Sumerian for is put to head, the sleep is so pleasant, as heart is pressed to heart, the pleasure is so sweet.
That is incredibly beautiful.
Well, thank you.
So beautiful.
I think although it wasn't really my purpose, I think it shows the way that the Sumerian tales can be readily utilized for modern ritual, for modern purposes. And perhaps that's because, people haven't changed so much in the thousands of years. And
No.
what we all want now is the same as what we want then, which is connection, heat, love. We're the same as we were then, I think.
Yeah. The only thing that's changed, of course, is our conception of the world and our access to technology and information. But
Mm,
at the heart of it all, it's as you said, it's the same.
we're the same.
Absolutely. I know that you, of course, are a member of the OTO. You have written extensively. You're also an educator. And as I understand it, you are now leading a class through the Blackthorn School. I was wondering if perhaps you could touch on that and share with our viewers and our listeners about this new venture that you've undertaken.
Well, certainly. I'm very proud to be associated with the Blackthorn School, and I've been teaching a foundational class on scrying with the Blackthorn School for a couple of years. I think the first cohort of my scrying class actually started right as the pandemic was hitting. I don't think we realized at the point the class started exactly how serious it would get. So I spent the first 5 months of lockdown doing my scrying class, and since then, of course, I've done it a number of other times. I'm really very proud of it, and in point of fact, I have actually I was teaching scrying before the Blackthorn School to folks in the OTO and to this kind of random people at conferences because it's a thing I feel really strongly about. The most ceremonial types think that scrying's not successful unless you have like the full CGI um, Gandalf Balrog experience, and it's not that way. I mean, like we don't have experiences like that. Maybe once in a lifetime does any magician have an experience like that if they're really lucky.
or while under the the sway of psychedelics.
Hmm. Well, that's a potent lever, and I not saying that uh, that's a bad idea, actually. I utilize those tools. But in the Blackthorn School class and in the workshops that I've taught, I use entirely legal means without substances that are on any schedule. It's too funny. But, here's the thing. People in the Western world, and let's like throw all of ceremonial magic under this bus.
Sure, why not?
Um, we're we think that all of this stuff should be rationally explicable and that we should be able to see it with our eyes. But it turns out that historically speaking, looking back at the Greeks, rationality wasn't king then. Mania was one of the ways to reach the gods, and doing things in a purposefully irrational, imaginative way is actually more suited to our biology, I would say. And one of the things that I describe in my class is that because we're incarnated, right? We have these bodies, we're we're perfect for scrying. Every last one of us is perfect. And all we have to do is tune our own unique instrument to listen. I mean, and just for the record, we're all kind of shitty at listening to one another, and learning how to deeply listen to invisible things and animals and objects can actually only only improve your whole life as a participant, I would say.
So, with regards to scrying, is there a specific method that you would recommend above all the others, or is it in terms of the course that you're leading? Is it more of a an inclusive model where you touch on various aspects or various tools that one could use through the course of their scrying experience?
The class itself is agnostic. So it doesn't presume that you're a ceremonial magician. It doesn't presume that you like to use crystal balls. Um, any of uh, any of the traditional means are worth examining. Black mirrors are fun. Um, of course, the most traditional way to scry is to look into a pool of water in a
Mm-hmm.
bowl. Any of those methods work. Um, you can use the front surface of your cell phone if you want, the rear view mirror of your car, preferably not while you're driving, right? But it doesn't really matter. And I think a thing that has happened to me through my practice is that I will get started looking at some reflective surface, and then I close my eyes, and then it's just a trance. So I don't honestly, I don't actually use media very much anymore. But of course, I teach all of those things up to and including the front surface of your cell phone. Because
The veritable Black Mirror, if you will.
yeah, I mean, you got to use what you have, and if if we don't learn anything else from the PGM, I think the major lesson of the PGM is, use what you have, get creative. Can you imagine what would have happened if the scribes who wrote the PGM had access to cars and microwave ovens and what, canned food? I don't know.
I think the world may have been a wilder place then if they had access to all of those things. I mean,
Hmm.
some of the magic and the practices in the PGM are, well, not some, a majority are quite cavalier in and of
Hmm.
themselves outside of the devotional aspects of the text. So I'm pretty sure that these rogue priests and magicians and scribes would certainly have found a way to further capitalize on their work and
I, th
service more clients that way.
I think actually, that brings up something for me. The devotional aspect that you just brought up. My principal practice these days is devotional. I haven't, no, I do obviously do workings and spells and stuff like that, but the thing I'm proudest of these days is that I've developed an outdoor shrine here in Rochester, New York, where I live now. And I have statues on plinths. I made a sidewalk up to it. It's under a grove. It's my major practice. I maintain a shrine for Typhon Set and for Hecate and Mary.
I think a devotional practice is the foundation and the capstone of any ritual,
Mm,
magical, ceremonial practice, because you have established a relationship with those intelligences, whether they're
mm,
spirits or deities, whatever the case may be. You can't just walk up to any authority figure and ask for a favor
mm,
if you don't know them. So I commend you on that. Devotion is 90% of my own personal praxis. And I firmly believe that without that aspect of my praxis being devotion, that I probably would not have the strength, if you will, the grasp,
mm.
the tenacity that would be required to navigate a swiftly changing world, and maintaining that spiritual center, because we can only do so much as human beings. We're only capable of so much in our human bodies, with our human faults and pitfalls.
No, I love it that you brought that up. I think one of the reasons that we all have a spiritual practice is to feel more connected with the world. And what better way to do that than to, continually offer and listen and make yourself available to deity.
Is that something that you focus on in your scrying class, encouraging your students to form a relationship with a deity or a spirit or even an ancestor to help facilitate these scrying experiences? Or is that something that is separate from your teaching work?
Oh, what a great question. The degree to which that comes into my class is that the first couple of exercises that we do are mediated through kind of a guardian spirit. Because some people actually come to the class because scrying is a little bit scary. And when we start, I give a lead up in the class that is hopefully not terrifying. And part of it is using your own holy guardian angel
Mm-hmm.
or an ancestor that's comfortable to you as a mediating force to help you, reach into the invisible world, let's call it.
I remember one individual that I know was relaying their experience when it came to scrying. They had everything set up with the mirror and the candles
Mm,
and the darkened room. And they related that when they began, they weren't they weren't connecting with the unseen.
mm-hmm,
And they were thinking of giving up. And then they just, you know, forwarded or soldiered through it. And
mm-hmm.
they felt a hand on their shoulder. And that immediately made them want to stop, because the experience was far too real, far too visceral to complete.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean that's actually a really good description of a lot of people's experience. The first when you begin, it's boring. And you have to sit through the boring. You have to be able to calm your body down, to make your brain stop thinking about what to have for dinner and what's on the grocery list, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start having an experience, it can be really, really frightening. And you have to learn how to sit with both of those, both the boring and the fear and everything in between. And I think I hope that I'm good at helping people through both of those stages. I mean, we all want to have the CGI experience, but it turns out that when people are thinking about it that way, they're thinking about, okay, um, Gandalf and Balrog on television or on the movie screen. It's not Gandalf and Balrog right behind you with, you know, being able to smell their breath and to feel the heat of the interaction.
Mhm.
When you have a full body experience of something that doesn't live next door and that you can't call on the phone, it can be spooky.
Are there any students in your class that have related such experiences to you during their scrying exercises?
Oh, occasionally, certainly. I mean, most of the fight in scrying is working through the boredom.
Mhm.
But when, as your friend, as with your friend, when you feel that hand on the shoulder, it's, you want to get up and run, or you want to stop the ritual, or you want to make it stop because it's unusual and freaky.
Yeah.
And what I tell the students who have experiences like that, if you get really frightened, yeah, stop, and then go back and re-engage. But really what you want to do is to be able to mediate that experience while you're having it. Be able to express to the spirit that, hey, if you freak me out too much, I'm gonna have to hang up the phone. It's a, it's just like when okay, if you call someone and they're weird to you, you always can hang
Yeah.
up the phone.
Establish that boundary.
Hmm.
Be
Yeah.
professional. Hang up the phone.
No. Uh,
Goodbye.
but following the spirit, actually following ritual arc is something that's taught in my class, and being persistent, stopping if you need to, re-engaging, developing relationship. It's
Mhm.
all a relationship. You put your finger square on that, actually.
How often are you teaching these classes? Is this a year-round class or is this like a semester, if you will?
My class is shorter than most of the ones at Blackthorn School. Some of those classes are a year long, others 6 months. Mine are 2.5 months in general. The foundational ones are short. They're not very expensive. Um, I only taught one last year because I was busy um, being a scientist.
Well, we all have to have a day job.
Oh no, I was busy paying the rent. But this year, I'm going to uh, my next class is going to start in the latter part of March, and I think I'm going to ask to have one every quarter moving forward. And the reason for that is that I taught a course on scrying at Paganicon last year.
Hmm.
That's a big esoteric meeting in Minneapolis, and it was standing room only. If the fire marshal had seen, I have never seen so many people in a hotel conference room. I was so honored. And if anybody who's listening right now is there, you know, big thanks. The Llewellyn folks actually were present and they've asked me for a prospectus and a proposal for a book. And so I'm going to be teaching my scrying class through the Blackthorn School every quarter this year, probably going into next year as I prepare my book for Llewellyn.
That's excellent. What's
Hmm.
your intended scope with the book? Is it going to be more in line with your scrying class, or is it going to go into more depth?
Well, it will take the material that's present in my scrying class and build on it. So there is a historical component to the class where we talk about um, ways that are known in historical literature,
Hmm.
ways to do this, mostly with focus on preparation and process. And the class actually goes through uh, a very serious criticism of our own censor suite and why it is that the world is much bigger than we sense. And I think the principal reason for me talking about that is because if you think the whole world is graspable by you personally and your senses,
Mhm.
well, firstly, you're delusional. But secondly, that makes the world a really small place, and it makes the rational thoughts that you have about the world dominant. And if you realize that the world is big and way more complicated than you can sense,
And often more irrational than we would comprehend.
oh my gosh, isn't it the truth? So there's this extensive criticism about how people work and why there's all this extra information around that we don't receive unless we're after it. And then there will be a whole bunch of exercises in the book to help people get better at this
So
stuff.
we talked about your career as an educator with the Blackthorn School. I was wondering if perhaps we could deviate in another direction. As I understand it, you have some publications that came out within the last year or so, and another one on the way, aside from your Llewellyn project. One of those publications being Conjure Codex. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a real honor to be included in Conjure Codex. That essay is a compare and contrast between the ritual doodad, let's call it that, called the Iynx, and the ritual doodad called the Stropholos, and the fact that those two things are not the same, and neither one of them was ever used to, historically at least, to compel the actions of a deity.
We'll stand
Um,
by for the comments, and I'll let you duke it out with the listeners and the viewers who would say otherwise.
I'm sure. So there's going to be some controversy about that, but the essay is a historical look at those things. The Yanks is flat piece of wood. It's circular. It spins. It makes a cool noise. People these days use it as a children's toy besides a ritual device. And you can, if you take it all the way back to Theocritus, you will see that that device is used as a propitiator, let's call it, of
Mhm.
erotic binding spells. And the Stropholos actually, it turns out that that word in Greek was not used until after the beginning of the Common Era, and is first found in the Chaldean oracles, and it's described as it's sounding a little bit like a Christmas tree ornament made of gold and sapphire, and it's used for in theurgical operations rather than in folk magic, which is really what an erotic binding spell turns out to be. And you know, so I document the historicity of these things, and I would like to proudly proclaim that my donation, my contribution to this notion is the fact that the Stropholos may very well be uh, a device used in initiations into the Greek mystery traditions. And I go through the reasons that I think about that in the essay. It's it's very different from my scrying um, efforts, say, in that the essay is very linear. It's history. It's highly referent, well referenced. People can go and dig up my sources if they want.
And I understand you have a contribution to Peter Mark Adams' book about the Hagia Sophia through Scarlet Imprint. Is that correct? Am I off the
Mm.
mark there?
No, as a result of an interview that I did with him on Thelema NOW, um, we started talking about the fact that the original dome of the Hagia Sophia was documented also historically to have this really amazing and kind of ethereal glow to it. And various folks, modern folks using computer modeling have tried to figure out what the original dome must have been like for the illumination of the thing to have been so unearthly. And it turns out, spoiler alert, the original dome was very flat and it had completely different optical properties to the domes that are present now. And I will say that the reason that the original dome isn't there anymore is it wasn't mechanically stable, and it fell during an earthquake less than 100 years after it had been built. They replaced the original dome with a more highly curved one that's nowhere, it's gorgeous, of course, don't get me wrong, but the illumination within it seems to be wholeheartedly different than the original one. And so my appendix is actually it's this weird combination of my professional and my esoteric life, and it's an analysis of reflective optics.
It's fascinating. You make science sound so sexy.
I'll let you read it, and then you can tell me if that's sexy.
Well,
It's not
perfect. I
it's
look
not
forward to
sexy
it.
in the same way as Babylon and Chaos.
Well, obviously not. We've got science and then spirituality. So
Mm. Yes, indeed.
so what's new on the horizon for you? We've touched on so many different subjects, your Babylon ritual, your classes through the Blackthorn School, your upcoming publication through Llewellyn. Now
Mm.
these topics, what's new on the horizon aside from these?
Well, I have an essay that's being combined with a bunch of other essays that have to do with triple goddess, the history of the triple goddess, what what triple goddesses are around now. And my essay that goes into this collection is about Mary, Mother of God, right? And Mother of Jesus, Mary Theotokos, and how she is the most popular triple goddess in the world right now. And Jack Grail is putting that together. I think it's under the auspices of Miskatonic. I'm not sure who's actually making the book, but
Mm-hmm.
be certain that Larry will be distributing it. And along those lines, probably the thing that I'm most excited about is a hymnal to Set Typhon that I've been working on. And the listeners of Thelema NOW and lots of other folks will recognize the cover of your book, which I have in my hands. And
Mm-hmm.
this is Lioness, Sam's book of hymnals to Inanna. It's gorgeous, and people who are listening and looking, um, be sure and get this. It's wonderful. And I want to bring people's attention to the spine. There is down here a 1. Sam's book is number 1 on this list of hymnals that are being produced by Grail Press, and Set Typhon is number 2. And I'm absolutely thrilled about that. We're starting to design the book, and I've never done that before. So this business of beautiful end papers and gorgeous sigils for the inside of the book that Rowan Cassidy is making.
Oh, excellent.
Um, I'm stunned and awed and humbled um, by Jack and Rowan, and my inclusion in this stable of effort is it's overwhelming to me.
That's wonderful news. When do you anticipate that title to be released? Is there a specific timeline, or are you still hammering out all of the details before you can cross
Yeah,
that
the
off your list?
no the details are all still in motion. Like I hope sometime by the middle of 2023 that the hymnal to Set Typhon is a for real thing. And I have to say something though about it. I watched as you dealt with people on Facebook not long ago, dealing with the fact that your anonyms were sensual and erotic, and there were some people whose noses were a little bit out of joint
Lots of
about
pearl
that.
clutching.
Pearl clutching. Well, people are going to be ripping their pearls clean off their neck. Um, when they read my hymns to Sat Typhon. Um, and for the record, if those people are listening to us now, um, if you were offended by Sam's book, then mine is not for you. Because I'm as naughty as Sam's was. It wasn't actually naughty. It was just beautiful and
It was in
respectful.
the line of the historical literature, so
And it
I kept
is.
that source material in mind.
Right. And so as people will doubtless understand, Set Typhon is a transgressive god, and it just gets crazier from there. The
As it should.
hmm,
As it should. I mean, you're
the the poems themselves are transgressive and erotic and violent, and in perfectly in keeping with the history of those deities.
I look forward to it, Harper.
I'm in trouble now.
Oh, not until they come for you with pitchforks and torches. I think you'll be fine for the time being, anyway. Well, it's been
Well,
wonderful chatting with you. Where
mm,
can people find you? Are you an active social media user, or are you largely a recluse in the world of the social media sphere?
I guess I could call myself both things. I don't share a lot of my personal life on social media, but I do post a lot of poetry. Um, so I have a Facebook profile. People who want to take my class, of course, can go to the Blackthorn School. People who want to experience my photography, I hardly claim to be an artist, but I do post pictures in Instagram. So folks can find me out there. If you want to get to know me, you actually have to, you know, breach breach etiquette and PM me, I guess,
Meet you in person.
and meet me in
Participate in a
person.
catalyzing ritual in an
Exact,
Airbnb.
exactly.
Well,
Gunshots are not guaranteed.
gunshots not guaranteed.
Nope.
Darn. Well, I will
Mm.
certainly put your applicable links in the about section of this video. And once again, Harper, it is a privilege and an honor to share the same space with you. And I thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. By way of leaving, I suppose, I don't give interviews to just anyone. I like to be the interviewer, and I'm only doing this because I honestly like you.
Well, your endorsement checks in the mail.
Awesome.
If you're a new viewer and would like to stay up to date with the latest from BiblioSophia, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for our channel.